The first time Leora stepped through the door of Palingenesis Pharmacy, she thought she'd walked into a greenhouse. Tendrils of steam drifted above glass terrariums crowded with moss and glowing lilies. Shelves were thick with amber phials, spiral-necked vials, cigar-shaped inhalers. Every container bore a hand-inked label, so looping and ornate it looked grown rather than written. The air was humid, verdant, laced with vanilla and petrichor and something older, a scent like the hush beneath library stacks. She came because of the flyer slipped under her studio door. We bottle what you've misplaced. One pull, one recollection. Side effects minor, subjective, transient. When you paint for a living, memories are currency. For 3 months, Leora had been frozen before a blank canvas, palette untouched except to smear rage across paper towel. Crisis exhibitions loomed. She owed 5 large pieces to a gallery that had taken a chance on her name. If she could only recall why the riot of crimson she'd once loved felt indispensable, why the cobalt her mother wore on her wedding day mattered, maybe the pigments would move again. The pharmacist looked nothing like the pharmacists she'd known at chain stores, those wary clerks in pastel coats. He was slight, silver-haired, smile twitching at the corners as if he'd learned courtesy by imitating birdsong. He wore a moss-green vest embroidered with an Ouroboros, and he greeted her without question, as though customers drifted in seeking intangible prescriptions every afternoon. "Leora Morel, isn't it?" he said. And somehow it wasn't unsettling that he knew her name. You smell of burnt umber, turpentine, and a sadness that clings to door hinges. I think I have exactly the tincture you require. She opened her mouth, closed it. Is this legal? Memory is not a controlled substance, he replied. Not yet. He guided her past cabinets with drawers labeled First Kiss, First Grief, First Lie. They passed an alcove paneled in cedar. She caught whiffs of brine and fireworks, or maybe fireworks reflected upon water. Finally, he stopped before a refrigerated vault whose shelves glimmered with shell-thin spheres. Each sphere contained swirling smoke the color of dawn. The past distills itself, he said, selecting a sphere and setting it inside a slender, pen-length inhaler. Inhales, not injections, safer. The formula crystallizes the sensory residue of a forgotten moment, nothing more. He pressed the inhaler into her palm. It was warm, pulsing faintly like a sleeping hummingbird. Inhale once. Count to 7 while holding the breath. Exhale through the nose. You will remember something you thought lost. And the side effects? One side effect, he corrected. Chromatic desaturation, a temporary dimming of color. It resolves gradually or precipitously depending on dosage and disposition. If you indulge rarely, the grayscale lifts in hours. If often, well, you'll make your own peace with shadow. His voice was dry, almost teasing. Artists adapt. She turned the inhaler over. On the brass clip she read, Bliss. Underneath, smaller, price variable. How much? No charge today, he said. First doses are samples. A business must advertise. Leora might have refused if desperation hadn't nipped her heels. She pressed the mouthpiece between her lips, thumbed the ridged trigger, and breathed. The air tasted of carnations and sea salt. Memory rumbled awake. She was 6, alone in her uncle's lighthouse. Storm outside, thunder shaking the panes. She'd crept down spiral steps to where barrels of paint stood, waiting to preserve the iron railings from rust. She'd pried a lid open, plunging her fingers into wet crimson, smearing it across stone walls, giggling at how the color crackled like live flame against gray. Her uncle discovering her, not anger but wonder in his eyes, he fetched a brush, joined her, in coloring the whole stairwell. 2 conspirators drunk on shade and stormlight. The recollection was so vivid it rewired the present. She felt, physically, the suction of the sea wind through cracks, smelled salt tang, heard gulls shriek. The bliss was total, a bloom of serotonin through bone and nerve, and her vision steadied. The lilies under the counter looked paler, like photographs sun-bleached in a shop window. The green in the pharmacist's vest had dulled. "Come back should you need more," he said, and returned to polishing a crystal retort clouded with silver fumes. Leora floated home. On the subway, posters looked as though someone had lowered saturation in Photoshop. But euphoria hot, humming carried her past worry. She unlocked her studio, dashed scarlet across canvas, and worked until dawn, laughing, crying, painting. A lighthouse staircase aflame. The grayscale lifted by morning tea. The world's colors flooded back so furiously the brass kettle shone like a miniature sun. She slept 3 hours, returned to the easel, and produced 2 more canvases in as many days. Each time energy faltered, she eyed the inhaler. She resisted for a while because she wanted to believe creativity belonged to her, not the pharmacist's elixir. On the 5th day, the well dried again. She returned to palingenesis. "You remember how it works," the pharmacist said, sliding across a tray holding 5 spears, each swirling a different hue. "Stronger memories cost more color." "How strong is strong?" He tapped the tray. 1 sphere glowed like molten gold. "This could recall the first moment you realized the world was not benign. Most customers are not ready. The milder ones recall childhood triumph or ordinary joys. Price per vial scales accordingly." Leora stared at the golden swirls. Painful memories made potent art. She thought of the car accident she refused to examine. The night hospital lights turned her father's skin paper thin. Outside the shop, a passerby's red umbrella looked almost gray already, as if her first dose had left a faint, permanent film. "Maybe something in between," she decided. He loaded a sphere tinted lavender. She paid with crumpled bills, feeling absurd, like she was buying a ticket to a theme park no one else could see. This time, the inhalation tasted of lilac, crushed underfoot. Memory burst. Her college dorm terrace, the night she and Mara smoked clove cigarettes and traced constellations until dawn, promising to conquer every gallery from Prague to Beijing. She remembered the streetlight glint on Mara's lips, the static shock when their shoulders touched, the unresolved question trembling in that space. It was exquisite. As the vision receded, the world dimmed further. Traffic lights dipped toward pastel. The red bead in her necklace looked almost brown. Colors returned next afternoon, but not entirely. Where once 100 shades of green filled the park, she now discerned maybe 60. Still, the artwork flowed, a series of canvases steeped in violet promise and star-throbbed sky. The gallery director emailed her ecstatic praise. She told herself 2 doses were enough. Bliss had become less overwhelming anyway, like hearing a song several times. And yet, memory is a drug with cunning claws. She lay in bed at night tasting phantom lilac, aching to know what else she had buried. Her 3rd visit to the pharmacy found 3 others waiting, a banker in a pinstripe suit, a grandmother in orthopedic shoes, a teenager clutching a cracked phone. All looked slightly washed out, as if someone had scrubbed at their outlines with a pencil eraser. No one spoke. A hush reigned, reverent as a church cue. The pharmacist greeted each by name, providing custom inhalers. The banker emerged blinking, lips parted in tremulous glee, then frowned at his own tie, twisting it as though uncertain how it came to be so dull. The grandmother clutched her purse and wept into her sleeve. The teenager ran outside, whooping, nearly colliding with a cyclist. When it was Lyra's turn, she asked, "Does it ever stop working?" "The soul cellar is vast," he replied. "But you can drink it dry if you guzzle mindlessly." "And the grayscale? Is there a threshold after which color doesn't come back?" He met her eyes. His irises, she noticed, were pale gray. "Yes." She didn't ask whether his own colors were gone permanently. The answer hovered in the lily-lit air. "3 inhalers," she said, surprising herself. "Give me them in ascending potency, and teach me how to load them myself." Days blurred. Inhaler, memory, bliss, paint. She relived first heartbreak, first triumph, The afternoon, she skipped a scholarship interview to kiss Mara in a museum stairwell. Each memory burned incandescent. Each time, color drained quicker, returned slower, paler. She learned to time doses, one at night to harvest visions, one at dawn to push through exhaustion when the world stood almost colorless. She wore tinted lenses to trick her mind into thinking vibrancy still existed. Yet she knew the difference, like tasting artificial sweetener. Gallery night arrived. Her paintings' riotous jewel tones, despite her own faded sight, drew critics like wasps to sun-split fruit. They hailed the works as ferocious excavations of nostalgia, praised her chromatic nerve across wineglasses, and murmured bids. Leora watched them absorb canvases she herself could scarcely perceive. Applause washed over her in pale ripples. She reached instinctively for the inhaler in her clutch before remembering the pharmacist's warning, never dose in public, lest memory eclipse reality. After midnight, she found herself outside, rain turning street lamps to halos. Mara was there, trailing gallery patrons. They hadn't spoken in years. Mara's dress might have been vermilion once. Now it looked rust brown. "Congratulations," Mara said, voice cautious. "Your show is—" She groped for adjectives. "A triumph of color?" Leora laughed, a brittle sound. "Irony, huh? I can barely see the hue of your lipstick." Mara stepped closer. "Are you sick?" Leora weighed honesty. The addiction felt private, sacred. Instead, she offered half-truth. "I've been revisiting old memories. Turns out nostalgia can bleach the present." Mara touched her wrist, and the warmth of it. That present moment pulse was more vivid than any shade of paint. "Maybe let the past rest," she whispered. "It doesn't owe you anything." Leora imagined telling her about the pharmacist, about inhalers wrapped in serpent green ribbon, about how with each blissful blast the palate thinned. She couldn't. When Mara hailed a cab, Leora almost followed. Instead, she walked the 10 blocks to Palingenesis, rainwater wicking down her coat in monochrome streaks. The shop was still open. It never seemed to close. Inside, candles flickered azure. Not that she could tell by eye labels told her. The pharmacist stood behind the counter, decanting smoke from one chamber to another. "I didn't plan to come," she said, voice raw. "I just sold paintings I can't see. Does that even make sense?" "It makes marked sense," he replied. "True artistry rarely aligns with physiology. I think the memories are starting to hurt more than they help." "They always did," he said. "Bliss is simply the honey drizzled on the knife." She leaned on the glass case, gaze snagging on a decanter labeled Mother's Laughter. Have you lost all color?" "Decades ago," he said. "But I remember color perfectly. Photographic memory, one might say. Even black and white film can project technicolor if the projector lives inside the skull." "That's comforting and horrifying," he smiled. "Yes. What happens when black is all that's left? Do you die? Black is not death. It is the fertile soil of beginnings. But if you wish to keep your hues, reduce dosage. Abstain. Abstain." The word sounded brutal, like slamming a gallery door on a sunny afternoon. "What if I wanted them back?" she asked. "All of them." He studied her, drumming delicate fingers. "There is a serum, counter-distillate, rare. It does not restore what you've sacrificed, but it teaches the eye to fabricate color afresh, like dreaming awake. Users describe it as inventing shades unnamed, yet it comes at a different price. Which is, every invented color replaces a memory you still possess, not the bottled ones, the living present. Yesterday's breakfast, today's rain, tomorrow's face. As hues bloom, recent days wilt. That's monstrous. So is amnesia. So is craving. We sell only what people demand." Leora pictured herself painting canvases, radiating new impossible pigments, jewel tones humanity had never seen, while forgetting this very conversation, forgetting Mara's wrist warmth, forgetting how triumph tasted. She stepped back. "No." He nodded, unsurprised. "Then I'll stop," she declared, though even as she spoke, yearning curled like ivy inside her ribs. Withdrawal is unpleasant. Think of the world glazed entirely in dishwater gray while euphoria roars somewhere just beyond touch. You must endure that hush. "If I come close to relaxing," she said, "promise you won't sell to me." "I make no promises that conflict with commerce," he replied softly. "But I do offer advice. Find new memories, bright ones strong enough that you don't need distillation. Bottle them, not in glass, but in muscle, in routine, in skin." Outside, dawn seeped across the city, though she saw only gradient charcoal. She walked home, ignoring the inhaler in her purse. She slept. She shivered. She dreamed of storms without color. For 3 weeks she endured grayscale. Critics thrust interview requests at her. She declined. She forced herself into the park at noon, even though sunlight felt like diluted bleach. She attended a laughter yoga class that sounded like hyenas in fog. She copied museum paintings, memorizing hue values by hex code rather than sight. She cooked peppers, timing until they charred sienna she couldn't see, relying on smell. Little by little, her life filled with unbottled moments, awkward, unspectacular, undeniably real. One evening, Mara visited. She brought a bottle of wine whose label boasted a cerise stallion. Leora perceived only a gray horse. They sat on the studio floor between canvases yet to be gesso-primed. "You haven't answered my texts," Mara said. "Sorry, I've been detoxing." "From what?" "From yesterday. From last decade." Leora met her eyes. "From the idea that art is only valid if wrung from a wound." Mara exhaled. "I missed you." Leora wanted to reach out, but hesitation scabbed over the urge. "I don't remember the exact shade of your eyes," she confessed. "But I remember how they widened when we talked constellations. I remember that feeling." "That's enough," Mara whispered. The next morning, an hour before daybreak, Leora awoke to a thin stripe of faint color at the curtain edge. It was not the triumphant rush of her first dose, rather a shy return, as if dawn were practicing scales outside her window. She sat upright, heart hammering. She crossed the room, drew the curtain. The sky was diluted mauve, not a memory, not a hallucination, real. Hers. Tears blurred vision further, but she saw the hue deepen toward rose. Pinks multiplied. On the billboard atop the building opposite, on a discarded balloon snagged in a fire escape. They were subtle, but they were true. She pressed a palm to the glass, laughing, sobbing, tasting salt and fresh bread and bruised lilac in the air. No inhaler. Just morning. She found the inhaler in her bedside drawer and placed it in a shoebox with her first gallery contracts and cords from her diploma. She taped the box shut, wrote on it with a thick black marker, "Archive of Lost Things." Weeks passed. Color burgeoned cautiously. Not every tint returned. Oranges were still faint, reds soft. But she learned delight in fine gradations. Graphite sky before thunder, warm gray of Mara's shirt, pewter gleam of wet asphalt. She painted with new reverence for neutrals, layering silver beneath thin veils of aqua, so light she had to trust memory more than sight. Reviewers called the next series subtle, aching restraint, unaware that each piece was a map of a reclamation. One rainy afternoon, she walked by Palingenesis. Curtains were drawn. A handwritten sign read, "Inventory depleted, seeking fresh suppliers of wonder." Beneath, in smaller ink, "Remember, fragrance alone cannot replace the flower." She never saw the pharmacist again. Sometimes she swore she smelled his shop in unexpected corners, the hush beneath library stacks, the vanilla of old paper, petrichor before storm. Maybe he'd moved on to another city, another pocket of craving. Maybe he'd become memory himself. Years later, a teenager at her exhibition asked, "What inspired your shift from vibrant saturation to earthy palettes?" Leora considered the question. She thought of blood-red staircases, lilac cigarettes, the grayscale purgatory, dawn's timid mauve. "I realized color isn't a property of paint," she said finally. "It's a negotiation between light and the willing eye. I had to lose it to learn that." She did not mention inhalers or bliss or black. Those belonged to a chapter sealed in a shoebox. Yet sometimes, alone in the studio, she lifted the lid just enough to remind herself. She'd inhale ordinary air, uncharged by alchemy, and the smell would summon real, present memories. The musk of turpentine, the laughter of friends dropping by, the living pulse of hue vibrating through grayscale. She filed those scents inside her heart. Uncorked, unbottled, never for sale.